Are you ready? Let's go!
Don't you sometimes just want to talk about everything? You know, there's days when you can just talk about anything. Need to sit back and chat about nothing at all? Nothing But Julie, coming at you with fun and creative topics and interviews.
Did you hear Julie's podcast? She's got the greatest topics.
Come join the chat about everything, anything, and nothing. So unwind and tune in to Nothing But Julie. Great topics and cool interviews with some pretty awesome people. And now, without further delay, here's Nothing But Julie.
Hello, everyone. Yes, it is the Nothing But Julie podcast, and I'm your host, Julie Schrager. Thank you so much for joining me. Today, I am going to be discussing something that I believe is very important for everybody, including myself. That's why I'm talking about it. It's how to break a bad habit. Now, in as much as it might seem like a topic that you might have heard before, or something to where you might say, I don't need to listen to this. Okay, you don't have to if you don't want to. But let me tell you something. I have noticed as I've gotten older that there are definitely things I don't know about, even though I try to tout that I know a little about everything. I really don't. And the fact that I am willing to continue learning, I don't feel that knowledge is ever something that ends, no matter what age you are. I believe that it's important to keep yourself updated on pretty much everything. And mental health is a huge addition to that. And we don't know everything. So it's not just about how to break a bad habit. It's about turning your cognitive control into mindful training. So what does that mean? Well, let me explain. So I was watching a TedTalks video, and a man by the name of Judson Brewer on TedTalks discussed a simple way to break a habit. Now, this man has gotten over 17 million views. 17 million views. And there's something to say about that. Let me give you a little detail into what he was talking about and why it really broke through to me. And, I definitely have some bad habits that I can break. One of the things that I struggle with is my eating. I grew up in a home where, Oreos were always around. The junk food was always there. It just is what it is, or it was what it was. But as I grew older, I never grew out of those bad habits. Started to gain some weight here and there. And, now that I'm 52, I have to be extraordinarily more mindful of what I eat, how much I consume, and it's not easy to break the habit of, being in love with foods like sugary foods. But once you understand why those foods are our go-to foods, it really helps in a psychological way to help break the habit of eating this stuff. Now, I don't hoard it. I don't eat it a lot like I used to. I definitely eat it much more in moderation. However, there are times when I'll just, chug down a pint of Ben & Jerry's and I'm like, I don't understand why I can't lose these last 10 pounds. Well, it's because, I just ate a pint of Ben & Jerry's. But why? Why did I eat that pint? Was it because I was stressed? What was the reason, the trigger for why I felt the need to eat that pint of amazing fish food? And yeah, it's good. But the fact of the matter is, it's total junk. It doesn't do anything for you. Sugar breeds tumors and feeds tumors. So the question is, what is behind us doing bad habits, not just food, but anything. Now, I know for myself that sugar is addictive. I know back in the, what was it, maybe the 60s, the 50s, when when the company came out with high fructose corn syrup and started putting it in everything. And then that was it. All of America was doomed because scientists realized how the brain functions, and that if you start adding some of this high fructose corn syrup to, let's say, cereals in the morning, well, your kids are more likely to eat that cereal in the morning. Great, you got them to eat cereal, but it's loaded with sugar. That's because of the cravings part of your brain. So let me begin to discuss this particular TED Talks. Now, this TED Talks is only about 9 minutes. And if you have an opportunity to watch it, you can go on TED.com and you can look for A Simple Way to Break a Habit by Judson Brewer. Believe this was back in 2015. Again, over 17 million views. And he discusses how when he was meditating or learning to meditate, the way that he learned was just to pay attention to his breath, which is basically what meditation is. The foundation is what meditation is from. It's from your breath. And we all have a tendency of, after a few seconds or a minute or so, our minds begin to wander. And he states how to bring back your mind and pay attention to the breath, because that is it right there. When you're mindful of what it is that you are doing, you can bring yourself back to that attention. And so even though it sounded simple, we are not used to doing this, and our brains are not used to functioning in a way of being mindful. Now, it's funny that I say that because, it's our brain, it's our mind, but it's not being used in a mindful way. We have such a vast amount of our brains that we don't use, and we get so used to it working a certain way, we don't realize that we can actually control it. But there's a specific area of our brain in the front, it's called the prefrontal cortex, I think, where that is the most logical space in our brain, and it's the one that can say, hey, look, you're not doing this right. You need to change it. It's very logical, but the thing of it is that logic does not last, and there's other areas of the brain that overstep it and can take over. And so this man Judson, he would, go on these retreats, and he would, take naps, and he would get exhausted, and it was all based on this instruction. And even though the instruction was simple, he realized that he was missing something, and he wanted to figure out why it was so difficult for him to pay attention. And he was talking about how studies show that even when we are doing everything in our capacity to pay attention to something, there's going to be a point where our minds just start to wander. And, we have to pick up our phone and check our email or our texts or Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, TikTok, whatever it is. Our brains just start to wander. So why? The question is, what is really going on? Why do our brains wander? Well, he goes on to say that we are fighting a learning process. And this is based on science, and it goes back to basic nervous system functions. And he calls it positive and negative reinforcement. Okay, well, simple enough, right? Okay, positive and negative reinforcement. I can remember that. But wait, what does it mean? So now, this goes for me. This is a great example, but you can use this for any other example that you might have a habit that has formed with. So for me, I see a food, right? Looks great. And he goes on to say, oh, but the first thing the brain says is calories. And then it says, but survival, right? Calories, survival. We eat the food. It tastes really good. And with added sugar, our bodies send a signal to the brain. And it just says, remember this, remember what, that it's so good. And don't forget where you can get it from and where you can purchase it or how you can get it. And he calls this context-dependent memory. And what happens is our brain becomes a repetitive process. And it's basically like see food, eat food, feel good, repeat. And then the trigger, whatever that trigger is, relates to a behavior and then reward. And so that is where I get into trouble. And the question is, well, what can I do about it? Or what can we do about it when it comes to, let's say, food, or when it comes to any habit, smoking, for example, any habit you can still look at it the same way. But our brains, the creative part of our brain says, the next time you're not feeling so good, you should eat something good so you'll feel better. Why don't you eat that pint of fish food, Ben and Jerry's fish food, ice cream, so you'll feel better. And then we're like, oh yeah, that's such a great idea. And then we learn that if we eat this ice cream because we're stressed out, we're sad, for whatever trigger it might be, well, we now have turned our brains into believing that we will now feel better. And there could be many different triggers. Instead of it being something from our stomachs because we're hungry, it could be an emotional trigger. But for me, it's a trigger for the urge to eat. Now, I don't eat a lot. I graze throughout the day. But my nemesis could be chocolate, is chocolate. Again, I have gotten a lot better over the years, but every now and then I will eat that thing and then I'll be pissed at myself the next day. It's like a cycle. So we have these triggers that urges us, to do these habits. And so let's go a little further back and think about, he says, in our teenage years, when, let's say, you were not the most popular person at school and you see all those other kids that are, smoking. And he goes on to say, hey, I know that I want to be that awesome. I want to be like that man, that boy, or that girl. And, you saw pictures of men or women making, smoking cigarettes sexy, whereas men looked cool, So this is something that we see and we visualize, see cool, smoke to be cool, you feel good. And again, he goes on to say that you repeat this. You have a trigger, you have this behavior, and then a reward. And every single time we do this, we constantly have a repetitive cycle. And therefore, it turns into a habit. And then what happens after? Then we feel stressed out because these triggers are making us do these things or are urging us to do these things like smoking or eating something sweet. So we have these brain processes and we don't realize that it's doing it. And then we keep doing the same thing. We feel guilty afterwards. So what can we do to perhaps break the cycle? When you have these brain processes, you can go from learning to surviving to making ourselves crazy with these habits. There are preventable causes of mortality and morbidity in the world. And what Judson talks about is going back to his meditation breath. And he says, what if instead of fighting our brains or trying to force ourselves to pay attention, that we tap into this natural reward-based learning process, but added a twist? This is a quote. What if instead we just got really curious about what was happening in our momentary experience? End quote. Think about that. What is happening in that moment? What's happening? What are you thinking of? There's something that's triggering habits or into specific things becoming habits. So the question is, can mindfulness training, could that help someone, let's say, quit smoking? I mean, it's not the easiest thing to do. My mom actually smoked for a while, and she finally went to see a hypnotist, and that was it. That's all she needed. It was really quite amazing to watch how she went from being a smoker to stopping the smoking. It's really incredible. But it's like trying to force yourself to pay attention to your breath when you're meditating. This is what Judson goes on to say. Like, he actually had to become mindful of his breath so he wouldn't stray from it. And so he kind of thought, maybe that's it. If I can force myself to pay attention to my breath, well, then maybe I could force myself to quit smoking. But guess what? This was a study done in his lab. And the majority of those people who tried to force themselves to stop a habit failed. They all failed. So what was the best way to do it? Well, he says that with mindfulness training, he dropped the forcing. No forcing. Instead, he focused on being curious. Okay, what does that mean? Sounds very interesting. He told the people in this study to smoke. Go ahead, go smoke. And they're like, wait, what? Yeah, you go ahead, go smoke. But be really curious about what it's like when you smoke. Think about it. You see, some of us have a tendency of, I'm going to keep using eating, but again, please insert any other habit because this can pertain to any habit. But with regard to, let's say, eating, or actually, let's go back to smoking. With regard to smoking, why did he say be curious? Because just like eating, if we're sitting and watching a really great movie, a series, a TV show, whatever it might be, and we decide that we're going to have said ice cream, the thing is some of the time you're not even tasting the ice cream. You're just shoveling it into your mouth and eating it, and that's it. So he said to these people in the smoke study, smoke as much as you want, but I want you to be mindful of what it's like. What it's like. I don't understand. Be curious. So they went ahead and they started smoking, and while they were smoking, they decided that they were going to do what he said, be curious about what it's like. And what did these women and men notice when they were smoking? One of the women in the study said, and I quote, mindful smoking, it smells stinky like stinky cheese and tastes like chemicals. Yuck, end quote. So now she knew cognitively that smoking was bad for her. Just like most any smoker knows it's bad for them. But she then discovered that being curious made you aware that when she smoked, it tastes like shit. So the habit turned into a question. Like, what does it taste like? So yeah, it tasted like shit. Now I can say, well, my ice cream tastes amazing. So, but let me continue on with what he was saying. He goes on to say, again, cognitively, your brain is able to understand. But she moved from knowing this to being wise. She moved from knowing in her head that smoking was bad for her, but knowing in her bones that it was bad. And she started to become, what he says, disenchanted with her behavior. So that's kind of like me saying, what is it that's causing me to want this ice cream? Well, the other day I couldn't think of anything except for I just really am craving it. But why? And that's when I went on to research the connection of what sugar can do to someone, how it actually is addictive, just like smoking. And the fact that that has become a habit. Oh, we're going to watch a really great movie. Ooh, let me get, some ice cream. But yet it's not good for you. So even though it tastes good, I now know in my head, let me restate that. I've always known in my head that it's not good for me, but I now know in my bones that I understand why I'm eating it. It's not because it's good for me. I like it, but it's because it's addictive, just like smoking. And so you have, I said a little earlier, the prefrontal cortex. So this, he goes on to say, is the youngest part of our brain. And he says that's from an evolutionary perspective. So what is it about the prefrontal cortex? Well, it comprehends on more of an intelligent level that we shouldn't smoke, let's say. It knows what is wrong. And it tries and tries to stop us and help us to change our behavior. But guess what happens? By the time we get halfway through a cigarette or halfway through eating that food, they call that cognitive control, where your prefrontal cortex is cognitively trying to control what it knows is bad for you or wrong what you're doing. And we use this to control our behavior. But here's the downside. Because this is in the front, it's the first part of our brain that legitimately can just stop working. It just goes offline after a while. It does its hardest and then it stops. So it stops when we get stressed out. So it doesn't help beyond a certain scope. So many of us have dealt with bad habits, throughout our lives. And, we are much more likely to do things that we shouldn't be doing when we're stressed out and then apologize for it later. The thing of it is, like, if I got angry with my son when he was younger over something, I just wouldn't be able to sometimes help myself from getting angry. And then I would feel horrible afterwards. But the thing of it is that even though we know it's wrong, sometimes we just can't help ourselves, because when we get so stressed out, we just have to let it out. So what happens when this prefrontal cortex and the cognitive control is offline? Well, we go back to our old habits. And that is why he uses this word disenchantment is so important, really important. We really need to have a better understanding of, why these things happen. We need to understand how we can relate to one another, when it comes to being able to break habits, because we're not alone. Every single time, we do something, we know that it's not helpful. seeing what we get from our habits. It helps us understand, like on a deeper level, that we know what's going on. And that's why mindfulness is so important. So instead of falling back into old habits, what can we do in order to help ourselves? Well, again, being mindful is something that can help us restrain ourselves from this behavior. So think about it. If you're less interested in doing something, you're not going to want to do it. So that is what mindfulness is all about. Being able to see what we can get when we get caught up in these behaviors and naturally letting things go. So it's not saying, okay, you're going to snap your finger and, we're done smoking or we're done, having habits of bad eating. However, if you do give it time and you stick with it, it can really work. I had done an interview with a dear friend of mine, Nikola Vitkovich, who does tapping. And let me tell you something. When you do things like that in itself can help with bad habits, because you have now become mindful of what it is you're doing. Once you see what you're doing, the brain all of a sudden is going, wait, what the hell? It's being made aware of these things. And now you've brought it to the front. You've brought it back to the prefrontal cortex, to where you are now saying, all right, I got it. I understand it now. Okay? I'm going to let go of these bad habits and I'm going to form new ones, but new healthy ones. And there's this paradox that, mindfulness is just being able to, get closer and more personal with what is happening in ourselves and especially in our minds, from second to second and moment to moment. And this willingness to have these experiences and go towards the experiences rather than trying to make unpleasant cravings go away as quickly as possible. This willingness to turn towards our experience, it's supported by curiosity, which is naturally rewarding. So what does it feel like? What does it feel like when you have this curiosity? Well, I've done this, and I can tell you from experience, I started to learn that these curiosities made me realize that the cravings that I had for my fish food were really about I would say, based on an emotional experience, like stress, restlessness, just wanting the taste because of that sugar addiction. And these are little snippets of experiences that we can actually manage instead of getting clobbered by this incredibly mind takeover of a habit. And what I mean by that, and what Judson means by that, is that, and I quote, when we get curious, we step out of our old fear-based reactive habit patterns and we step into being. We become the inner scientist where we're eagerly awaiting that next data point, end quote. But you see, I kind of focus on that word, reactive. What is it that we are reacting to? So it sounds very simple, but most things are. Think about it. When you formed a habit, it was pretty simple to form it. But why can't it be just as simple to unravel it? Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, that makes a lot of sense once you think about it or you put the words into context. There was one study that he had done on mindfulness training, that was considered twice as good as the gold standard therapy as helping people to quit. So it actually works. He studied the brains of experienced meditators, and he actually found during this study that parts of what they call a neural network of self-referential processing, which is called the default mode network, were at play. Okay, what does that mean? It means that this particular region of this network is not always activated. Isn't that pretty cool? So when it is activated, it's not by craving itself. But when we kind of get caught up in it, we kind of get sucked in and it takes us for a ride. It's getting caught up in it. So on the flip side, when you let it go and when you step out of this particular process because you're now curiously aware of what's happening, he says that this same brain region quiets down. Because you've become curious about what it is you're doing, all of a sudden you're thinking now. And because you're thinking, you are on the road to recovery. So there are apps out there where it targets some of these mechanisms, and there's certain technologies that can help in these apps. It can help actual, people who have bad habits and help them out of these unhealthy habits. I haven't found anyone that I really love. His app is only for smoking, to stop smoking and vaping. So it's not that, but if you become curious about what it is, if you just take a step to question why am I doing this? All of a sudden you're opening up all these other areas of your brain that is going to just rock your world. Your brain is going to be like, wait, what the hell is going on here? I'm actually taking the time to help myself to stop a habit that I created. So let's say you don't smoke or you don't stress eat. Well, maybe the next time you feel the urge to pick up your phone and text or go onto social media because you're bored, that means that you're trying to distract yourself from something mostly. But it's a compulsion. We all compulsively respond to, let's say, a text message or an email. And we need to kind of tap into what our natural capacity is. And he says, Judson, being curiously aware of what is happening in your body and in your mind in that moment is just another chance to stop exhaustive habits or to step out of it. I'm telling you, once you become aware of what you're doing, like I know I am having that pint. All right, I'm aware of it. I know I'm doing it. Okay, how am I going to stop it? Well, I realized because I like sugar. Like I said earlier. All right, a lot of people like sugar. So what? Then, like I said, I did a little bit of research as to why our brains are so wrapped around sugar and how it's addictive, and reading about that and making myself aware of that it's addictive helped me. But why is it that there are some times I really want sugar? Is it because it's addictive, or is there something going on in my life at that moment that has caused me to send my husband to the supermarket and get me that pint of Ben & Jerry's fish food? Yeah, I was bored. I didn't have much going on for the day. I was bored, and that was me kind of getting out of my funk. But I realized it. So then what can you do? Well, guess what? I could have had an alternative snack. I didn't have to have that, but I could have still done so. I could have had, 85, if not 90% less of the ice cream. And then I could have had maybe some pretzels or a little popcorn or a little something just to kind of help with my cravings, because I don't want to stop myself from wanting something. I just have to come up with better alternatives. And so what could I have done? I could have had much less ice cream. I could have had something that was much more healthy. And I could have had a different kind of carb. I could have done something because I was so perpetually aware of what I was doing. You understand? So if you notice the urge, become curious. Why are you having this urge? And once you get curious, you can then start letting go of these habits. So that is my take on letting go of habits, along with tapping. And if you can learn to understand why you are doing it, you can then tap your way out of it. If you go onto my friend's website, or even onto her Facebook page, I do believe if you listen to one of my other podcasts, you can get all the information. But her website is fasterchanges.com, and you can sign up for a week of free tapping. And she's just amazing. But the thing about these habits and also and stopping, I'm like losing my mind with I'm not even like functioning with how I'm talking right now. Tapping and stopping habits, like how does it work? So I don't disagree with what Judson is saying, but there are a variety of ways that you can stop bad habits. So aside from what he said, becoming mindful and understanding why you're doing it, yeah, definitely helps. But there's other things that can help. If you tap, you can stop smoking. You won't crave them as much because of the EFT, which is another form of tapping that my friend Nicola does, which is emotional freedom technique. It helps to clear up, let's say, negative emotions. And when you're tapping, it brings to light these things and lets you take a positive step or positive steps forward. So let's say you want to smoke. I keep going back to that because it's the first thing in my head. So just understand that whatever habit you want to break, this will work. How do you use tapping? Well, I do suggest that you go onto the podcast with Nicola Vitkovich because she really can help. But the main thing is you're going to need to want to change. That is first and foremost. You have to learn to change. So for me, when you tap, you're getting a mental, physical, and emotional release. And it has this positive effect on your cortisol levels. So it reduces that kind of fight or flight response that we get when we have stress. So how does EFT essentially help you? If you take the time to read about it, I am telling you that it is such a great way to stay on track. And it's very hard for me to describe how it helps. But when you start EFT, okay, it opens up a world of this emotional freedom, which is part of EFT. It actually uses cognitive therapy. It uses exposure therapy. And it opens up your mind to how to getting into your brain, excuse me, and how you can really stop urges and stop habits. It's something that my parents started to do. If you have a sugar addiction like I used to, oh boy, let me tell you, I wish that I knew about this years ago. But you know what? For me, it's never too late to start something. But you're repeatedly saying these like emotionally charged statements to yourself. So if you want to, let's say, kick this sugar habit, and it's now called tapping, but I believe it was called EFT, and it is still called EFT. So what you're doing is you're kind of like tapping on these acupressure points of your body or energy meridians. And while you repeatedly tap, you're repeating emotionally charged statements. So you're saying specific things. And people like my friend Nikki, practitioners, they can actually help to release energy blockages in your body. And by releasing these blockages in the body, it gives way to like a physical and psychological problem like addiction, anger, anxiety. And sometimes there's trauma that has caused you to do these things. And to me, it's such a great way to decrease the symptoms for those who have, well, a habit or stress or any kind of anxiety. I think that you should definitely check it out. You can basically, well, the question a lot of people have is, how does tapping on your body help recover from, let's say, anxiety or for food cravings? And it's when you have some form of trauma or something that's causing you to be anxious, it's as if your body downloads like a virus into your brain. And it goes into, let's say, your nervous system and into your brain and all that. And your brain has files for everything. Everything. It's the most organized part of your body, if you can believe that, with some people who are not that organized. And it's almost like this unconscious thing that's going on with this story that runs every single time you think about it. And that's, the physiological response of your body. So when you're tapping, it finds that virus that's been installed and it helps to uninstall it. So like, let's say you have a memory. They say that a memory is only as old as, when you last looked at it. So if you're tapping, you're now creating a pleasant feeling, thinking about an old memory, that file. And now this picture that you have, or this story you've had in your head, is now being, almost cleared away. And the tapping kind of releases that blocked energy that's just been trapped. So I'm continuing to talk about this, and there's so much I can talk about, but I don't want to extend this podcast. I would rather get professionals to get on and talk about it. When you have a chance, please go to the podcast that I did with my friend Nikki. And remember, these habits we formed are not the definition of who we are. Habits can be broken, but you have to do it the right way. You have to do it in a way that will allow you to have that emotional freedom. So tapping or being curious and being mindful are the best ways to really help release those issues. Thanks so much for joining me.